Hi, Father. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Fine.
Is it just you here?
Yeah.
Wow. And I thought I was running late. It took me an hour to get home when normally it takes me 35 minutes. Um, all right. Well, let's see what's going on here.
My fellow deacons will not can't attend because they're attending prayer and fasting here.
Because what?
They're attending our prayer and fasting event.
Um, all right. Well, we may want to, I mean, if no one's here, we may want to, oh, here comes somebody. Hmm.
It's already 7, Father.
Hearing a prayer and is this a Lenten thing, Deacon?
Yes.
So is this a Lenten thing they're doing?
Now, every end of the month.
All right. All right. Well, I'm gonna see. I've got Mr. Bryant here. Let's see if Mr. Oh, that's right. He told me next he wasn't gonna be here this time, so we're not gonna have air. We don't have. So I think this may be it. All right, gentlemen. So this evening is we're doing the 1400s. Well, first of all, so housekeeping. I told you I would have the slides taken care of by this evening, or I would share them. Well, in good fashion, I reminded Father Patan that I had to talk about it. He got back to me this morning, wanted to do a Zoom meeting to go through how I was uploading them. I said, sure, give me a call. He called me 6 hours later. I was on with the door, so we did not get a chance to talk. So I will try and connect with him tomorrow. If not that, I will go ahead and I will share the slides with you because I know you need them. Um, I also did not have a chance to update the exploded outline this week. I will take care. I will do that when I upload tomorrow. I was actually making little tweaks in the presentation up until even this morning. So um, anyway, I will get that to you. We're gonna hopefully talk to Father Patan, and I will get you access to the slides via the Scott School website, and I will upload. I tried to fix. I think I did fix the mistakenly uploaded slides. Somebody I don't remember who logged on several times when it wasn't class time. So there's a lot of little bit logins. Was that you? You're muted. I can't hear
It
you.
w
You're muted.
No, I didn't know the class time was changed to 6 until I read the email.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna see if I go back through. I can delete those because there's a whole bunch of them. But I think I cleaned it up. I think I uploaded the correct one. So take a look there and let me know if it's still wrong. But I think I took care of it. Um, so for this evening, we're doing the 1400s. I have a number of slides to show, but I don't have as many as we did last time. However, 50. So I've got what 70 something slides for the 1400s. I thought about, oh, we could do 2 centuries. I have over 120 for the 15, which is huge, the Reformation and everything else. So, um, we're gonna go in. We'll do the 1400s this evening, but there's a possibility if we're an hour and change, I'm just gonna give you the rest of it. We'll make it a short evening this evening, and we'll go into the 1500s next week. I mean, it's Ember Friday, so give you more time to focus on that. But um, anyway, we'll get started. I'm doing 1400s, and we'll see how far we get. Are there any questions before we get started? Nope. All right. Let me go ahead and where are we here? Can you all see the 1400s? Awesome. All right. Before we get started, let's pray. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Almighty God, watch over us as we study the history of the church and the action of grace within the society it created. Help us to better appreciate your working in history and to better understand your will and how you guide the world and how you work in individual souls. Um, and assist us in learning your action in the world. We ask through Jesus Christ, our only mediator and advocate, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. All right. So several things. I'll launch in here and we can get going. I'm going to shrink this up here. The Great Western Schism. We began this last time, where the Rome was very corrupt and the popes moved to Avignon. Um, this is one of the more politically complicated stories in the history of Christendom. I'm going to give you the major players and the major structure. If you try to read on this, man, there are all kinds of ins and outs in this thing. So the period of 1387 to 1470, there were rival claims. The title of Pope is referred to as the Great Western Schism or the Great Controversy of the Anti-Popes by some Catholic scholars, and the Second Great Schism, and by many secular Protestant historians. Parties within the church were divided in their allegiance among various claimants to the office of Pope. The Council of Constance finally resolved the issue in 1417. Election of Martin, Pope was accepted by all. This was an extremely complicated era. There are saints of the church canonized by the Roman Church who supported the wrong Pope. It was not obvious at all. They kept trying to fix it. The popes did not want to leave Avignon, so they'd hold synods and try and elect new popes. But then you had another pope, and we'll do another one, and we'll elect it. So this really is just a huge political mess, and looked very bad in the church at the time. So in the period of 1347-8, when the two claimants of pope, all right. Actually, I think that's the same word. Same wording there. I just added an image and didn't take the other slide out. So you can see again the idea of the various claimants and the papacy of Avignon. The papal court in Avignon had been there for decades. They claimed to be the rightful heirs of the throne of St. Peter. The Pope had left from Rome to Avignon and been residing in Avignon. So Avignon felt that that was where the true Pope was, and anyone elected anywhere else did not have the authority of the papacy. Papacy was at Avignon. There were several popes in Avignon here, and again, this looks kind of jumbled, and I kind of apologize for this. But as I was reading through there just is so much scheming and politicking and people backing different things and popes rivaling to get around. So it is absolutely not an easy subject to study here. But as you can see, a number of the popes were here. So returned to Avignon, back to Rome, and then back to Avignon. And the other popes were elected, who were later considered to be anti-popes. So you can see here the papacy of Rome. They tried to do another conclave brave because they wanted the Roman Pope and they elected somebody and he's the Pope now. And Avignon said, no, we're the Pope. And so they were again rival claimants at the same time. And this was, oh, come on. This created a great deal of strife and where did the Pope, who was the Pope and where did he reside? These popes oftentimes would issue edicts. How much power did they have? It was not really known. The Council of Pisa. So I don't know if it was there were in an effort to end the schism between Rome and Avignon, they decided to hold the Council of Pisa, to end the schism. Why anyone thought this was a good idea is beyond me, because all of a sudden you had a pope was elected, first Alexander V and then John the 23rd, but who was going to accept them? So all of a sudden, at a third claim, it was supposed to be, well, this is we'll hold a neutral council at Pisa and it'll put an end to it. Well, no, it won't, because neither Avignon nor Rome wanted to give up their authority. So that added another one there. So this just got more and more complicated with each of them hurling insults. I don't recall if there's any excommunications or not, but it was a huge hornet's nest. So you can see kind of how this is laid out here. First of all, you have the heads off to Avignon here. Urban II in Rome, the two of them fighting. Finally, you have the Council of Pisa here in the early 1400s here, and you have the second pope. He reigned very briefly. He reigned longer, but you have three of these popes, and this is just a huge. And this will be remembered, and this will be brought up as the reformers begin to voice their complaints against the church. All right, you can see here who supported who. All right, allegiance to Avignon, Southern Italy, Avignon, Sicily, Avignon, Spain, and France supporting Avignon, um, supporting Rome, up the northern Italy supporting Rome, England and the Eastern Kingdom supporting Rome, and then some of them weren't involved. But a lot of this had to do with if you knew somebody who you liked. There was a lot of scheming going on. So this was again a very difficult period with these multiple claimants, each of them trying to behave as the Pope, each of them issuing edicts, writing documents, and they began to conflict with one another. And the thing was, it was a very big mess. They finally, again, they finally had one synod in Rome, re-elected, and had one final pope. So this doesn't necessarily apply to Anglicanism, but it is something you should know. Anybody, any questions about this debacle of the Great Western Schism? All right, off we go. The fall of Constantinople, also known as the conquest of Constantinople, was the capture of the capital of the Byzantine Empire by the Turks of the Ottoman Empire. The city was captured 20th of May, 1453, as part of the culmination of a 53-day siege begun on April 6th. At this point in time, the Ottoman Empire had completely surrounded what was the Byzantine Empire. They had surely been chipping away at the areas of all this used to be the Byzantine Empire, and the Ottomans had slowly but surely chipped away at this. And this the Greece, again, this is the Holy Mountain. This is the area of orthodoxy that was held on. And this was all really you had left of the Byzantine Empire. They were utterly surrounded by the Ottoman Sultanate. And at some point in time, it just became obvious that they were not going to be able to survive anymore. Now, the Byzantine Empire had a number of resources, and Constantinople had been built with the idea that this might happen. So they felt they were ready. However, they also saw the overwhelming odds that they were confronted with. All right, you can see here it breaks down Mamluk Sultanate, the Sultanate of Rome, and this idea of here and the Byzantine Empire was shrinking down. This is actually beforehand here. So you can see how that they're encroaching and how the Sultanate is growing in power. You can see at this point, here we are. Ottoman Empire finally controls the entirety of what it was called, of the area, and all you had left was again was the Holy Island, island and this actual isthmus here for Constantinople, and everything else was overwhelmed with the Ottoman Empire. The siege happened like this. The As the land forces moved up and encircled again, and this is Constantinople here, this little thumb on the end of the peninsula, and this little piece right here. All right. What happened here was they actually moved in, the Byzantines actually moved in and they sank ships in their own harbor right here. All right, they besieged here so that the Ottomans couldn't get in and couldn't get through. They had these ships and they sank them. So the Ottoman coming up here, the idea was not to let them get through and be able to besiege the main part of the city. Not a bad idea, really. And again, the walls around here were very, very fortified. So they felt that they had um, set themselves up to where they could defend this as best as possible. I'm not sure they felt that they could survive because they were completely surrounded, but they felt the walls had been reinforced and they did not have access through the isthmus here, that the Byzantines could survive this. The walls of Constantinople had never been breached, but they were very old. So thus began the 53-day siege to take the jewel of Christendom, second only to Rome. The walls were huge. I think they were something like several hundred, if not 1,000 feet thick. There were actually outer sections, and you'd go along with another section. I mean, they were just massive. The walls were just massive. So even if you were to shoot, say, a cannonball or something over there, it would go over the wall. The chances of it hitting the inside of the city were actually kind of shallow because you literally have rampart after rampart after rampart on these walls. However, the Muslims brought a new kind of tool, and that was the cannon. They really had not been used previously to any great extent, and the size of these cannons were just tremendous. You can see here, I mean, I'm not even sure how you pick up a cannonball to load it in there. So the Muslims brought this new kind of weapon to take on the walls of Constantinople. And they did. They brought up here, and these do not, I didn't find a good picture, but these do not do the walls of Constantinople any justice at all. They were literally massive and had several layers to them. Not only they had several layers from the centuries previous, but they'd been reinforced. So the Muslims lined up with these cannons and began pelting the wall and slowly but surely working it away so that they could get over and get into the city. That combined with scaling techniques, I can't think of the term for it right now, but you have and these are photos. They didn't really have any good photos of the actual siege because there were no photos made it or drawings made of it. But you actually had things you'd roll up and try and get into there with, and the Muslims did this, and they were trying to besiege and get over the walls and get through the walls of Constantinople to be able to take it. All right. The attacking army, Ottoman army, which had significantly outnumbered Constantinople's defenders, was commanded by 21-year-old Sultan Mehmed II, later named the Conqueror. He was actually very young, and this was a very brave move for him to be doing this. He had a pretty illustrious career, but it was still a very bold move for him to try and take Constantinople. Which was again, this was the real jewel in the Ottoman Empire wanted to take. As the Muslim Empire, as the Sultan himself got closer and such, it became obvious that the walls were not going to hold, and the Muslim army was doing severe damage to the walls, and that fall was almost inevitable. He finally rode in, camping outside, and then finally riding into the main gate of Constantinople, and came in as a conqueror. And the Byzantines realized that the time was over, that the Byzantine Empire had officially fallen. So he rode in finally after 53 days and took the city. The apple of Christendom, so to speak, had fallen, and the Muslims came in. I don't remember. I was reading, looking it over as far as the level of. They were not looking to ransack and kill the city. They were looking to run it, and so they came in. I think I don't even know if there was any kind of great slaughter per se. What there was just Islam came in and took it over and was now in control. So the Muslim world finally gained control of Constantinople. The great church of Hagia Sophia was converted into a mosque. Um, it was horrific. This great church that was built by Justinian and what had been one of the jewels of Christendom. This massive church was the biggest church in Christendom for a very, very long time, with huge internal domes where the Byzantine liturgy developed and grew, and many fathers of the church were the patriarchs of Constantinople. The mosaics were plastered over in Islamic, and many of you may have seen the pictures of it because it's a museum now. It's no longer a mosque. But when this was first taken over, the inside was plastered over with Muslim writing on it. Everything was converted into a mosque, and thus finally the city was taken over and became a Muslim stronghold. And this gave, and we'll cover this in a couple of centuries, Islam a tremendous vantage point into taking over the entirety of the West. So this was a great threat to the European continent was the fact that Islam had finally taken over Constantinople. Any questions on the fall of Constantinople? Nope. All right, off we go. The printing press. The po with the possible exception of the internet, with the single most influential happening in almost the history of Christendom was the printing press. No device so changed the world, broke down barriers, and leveled social stratums as the printing press. It was invented in Germany around 1440 by the goldsmith Johannes Gutenberg. The movable type printing press started the printing revolution. Suddenly, books large and small, could be printed in a week's time, not years. So, up to this point in time, what you had was handwritten books. Scribes, many of the monastics or religious who had time to do this, although there were professional scribes in the civilian world, would write out and would copy these books. And had been doing so for centuries. The various types of scripts have been developed to make it easier to write. You'd have illuminated manuscripts. You had this whole thing, but books took a long time to write, a long time to copy, and the writing was tedious. Um, you could make a mistake far too easily, and above all, the time that was spent to copy the books made them very expensive, and really only the wealthiest had them. Certain universities, certain churches had them. Books that were older, there was a certain availability to, but new books were hard to come by. The number of writers who were writing books was not all that high. And so, because it took years to complete, they were very expensive. The printing press allowed a printer to set a book up and run off multiple copies, thus exponentially increasing output and shortening production time. What you had here, and I'll show more pictures of it coming up here, a central press, and what you'd have was he would lay out on this bottom here type. He would lay out the text of it here, and then with these ink blotters, he would roll ink over it. And then they would slide paper on top of this, slide it under, press it, bring it out, and you had the imprint of the book on the paper, and they could then cut it and make it and bind it into books. Now, it was somewhat tedious to lay out the type on this. So this was the more tedious part, to lay the type out on this. However, once it was laid out, he could knock off 100 copies in less than a day. So it exponentially, I mean, laying out the movable face type on the printer had a tedious level to it, but once it was laid out, you could run off multiple copies of these books. You can see stored up the letters, and they would be laid out. Here's the guy again. He's pressing it down, and you have the copies of the books that they make, and you had here the movable type, and you would take these out and you would set them into this frame, and you'd lay out the text of the book in the frame, slide a piece of paper over the top of it here, and then you'd press it down and imprint on the page. So again, once the page was laid out, you could print off copies very, very quickly. The first book they printed was, in fact, the Bible, the Gutenberg Bible. You probably heard of it here. This is a good example, and you can see how this was done. They actually kept, we talked about the codexes way back in the beginning, and how codexes were based upon your rolling books, and how you would roll the book forward and you'd have the section to read. And codexes were often just scrolls that were cut. This continues. We're 1400 years after Christ, and they're still using, I mean, you still see it in Bibles and in breviaries and such. You still see this two-column style for holy books. But you can see there the Gutenberg Bible. Um, you can see how the script actually looks fairly clean. You can see the individual letters here. Letters like this, it's an individual letter. Were laid out here and were put up, were laid out, and you can see the script. Now, one of the things you're going to notice here, and I'll cover more of this in a little bit, is uses of things. For example, the F's and S's will oftentimes look the same. That develops a little bit. What you have is, if you can combine letters, or use the same letter for multiple things, you don't have to buy as many letters. You also have shorthand that will oftentimes develop, like a CT, the ligature there, a lot of CTs. So that was one letter that they would create here. All right. And you also can see they did have different styles and types of typeset. All right. Some of them were beautiful. Now, oftentimes, this might have been drawn afterwards. It might have been added on. It was actually probably drawn in after the fact, but you can see how clean and how clear the type was compared. And again, there were no mistakes here because you laid this out. Now, and you, if a typesetter makes a mistake, that's a different story. But normally speaking, once you lay it out and you have someone, as where the proofreading began at this era, was making sure it all looked good, and you could lean and you could do it and print and press it, and every single page looked exactly the same. There was no more, once it was laid out and checked, there was no more chance for error in succeeding copies. You also did have this. This was actually probably its own thing, and they would actually do this. This is kind of probably a later version, and they could actually do different colors on the letters. All right. One of the things here is printers got very creative with their typeface. So for example, you can see here the whole book of Psalms. That's clearly two V's, right? Again, the F's and S's. Some of that was a printer would run out of a letter. He only had so many S's, and he needs more S's, and all of a sudden he's out of S's, so he begins replacing them. Like SS will be FS, and he began. So you did have individual things in certain, and it became, initially it was individual printers would run out of letters and they would become creative, which might make the book a bit more difficult to read. Later on, the printers would get together and agree that, they didn't want to buy as many S's, so SS would be FS, and they tried to make that a standard. And then also you'd have, individual printers would have their own fancy things to try and sell more books. But you can see how they had to use what they could, for the various letters to be able to print the books. Here's an example. The big letter right here was probably its own letter. It was a specially carved letter here. All right. And you can see how you have, these are individual tiles. These are original. Again, here's your, it looks like your S and your F's are the same thing. All right. There was some creativity. These kind of letters here, were special letters for the beginning of words. Here you have what looks like a double S. See that right there, right here, is that's going to be its own key. He didn't a double S, so this guy actually made an F post-it SS That's an internet. That's one. That's only one letter right there. So he can do a double S using only one letter. Here the and. You guys recognize this here. All right. That's the ET. This is when this comes around. Was it rather than having an ET, he could have a whole number of these here, of these, and again, these are carved in, all right? But these are a number of these things, and all of a sudden he doesn't have to have as many E's and T's, or he can use them elsewhere. He can use the T's here, right? He can use the E's here. Instead of saying and, et, he has this one here, and he can get a whole bunch of these, and he can use that instead. So you're going to see a number of these kind of, here's another one of your double S's here. All right. These are individual keys designed to personalize the individual printer and what they wanted to do. Also to cut down on the number of tiles that you needed. So you can see here the different techniques and tricks that they were using to um, be able to get because you haven't needed a lot of letters. This cut down on the number of letters you can use, and it also made it easier to the conventions for reading it. Any questions about the printing press?
Yeah, I was wondering what was the literacy rate at this time if they're printing if they're able to print all these books and make it more accessible, like was he the I guess you'd say the common man able to read at that time, or what was
That's a
education
that's a
like?
very good question, and I'm going to address it a little bit as we get farther along here. It rockets, it skyrockets because of the availability of printed books, both in Latin as well as the vernacular. You're going to have books printing, and literacy is going to skyrocket. So that's a very good question. Over the course of the 14 to 1500s, more and more people are reading. Translations are coming out, and you can print these translations. It's going to become a huge problem with the church and these questions here, and I'm going to cover that a little bit later on. So no, your absolute literacy rates will exponentially grow over the course of the 1400s. Any other questions? All right, off we go. The Pre-Reformation. A new kind of scholar was born in the 1400s. This is a direct answer to your question, Nate. He was a polyglot and spoke several languages and was curious and critical. These men began to take a look carefully at many things religion, politics, and society in general. And I'm mentioning Erasmus here because he's one of the most famous. Glots or glosses. Beginning in the late 1300s, and especially in the 1400s, at the innovation of the printing press, books began to be published in multiple languages side by side. Glot, and you've heard of a polyglot, someone who speaks more than one language. Books with multiple languages, or glosses, and you've heard of a glossary where the notes are kept. Books with notes and commentary in their context. This offers reader a chance to read sacred texts from different perspectives. It also created a new problem. Here is an example of a glot. All right, the idea being is there's several languages. You have Hebrew, Latin, Greek, two versions of the Latin and Greek, and all of a sudden you have people learning the Greek, learning the Hebrew, all right, learning Syriac as well, having access to these things, and because they were laying this text side by side, you could look at the Latin and go back and start to figure out. And again, did have some of the books from Constantinople. Remember, Constantinople was fallen, so many of the books and such that had been there were brought over during the early 1400s. So many new manuscripts. We talk about that during the 1200s. How many Greek manuscripts were able to come over to the West, and they had access to Aristotle. You can see here the Bible, Hebrew. Samaritana, so the Samaritan language, the Chaldean language, Greek, the Syriac language, Latin, and Arabic. So this Bible is going to give you the same text in all those languages. People were going through there and were studying the Bible in these original languages, not just in Latin, all right, but again, all these various languages. Literacy in these languages exploded. People began to read and began to look at the mysteries of the Bible in these various languages. All right, here's another beautiful example of Hebrew. Um, you Latin there, Latin, and you this you have, I don't even, I guess maybe that's Greek still, but you also have, you'd also, again, these are glosses as well. These are oftentimes, actually this is Chaldaic, it looks like here. Oftentimes you would have notes where you would come along here and you, oh, there's a note, and you'd come down here and say, we have another version that has this. Or in the Greek, these words aren't there. Or in the Chaldean, this isn't here. Or these words are added from this man, and all of a sudden you have this wealth of these various manuscripts and the original Latin text. There's notes about it in this manuscript. We don't find it from this manuscript. We have these additional words. So all of a sudden you have this wealth of information of these texts flowing in for the academics of Europe. Another beautiful example here, um, of these glots and gloss. You see here, that looks like it's Arabic. You actually have, is your Arabic here, a translation of the Arabic. And again, you have, I can't tell if that's Hebrew or that's Greek and Latin. Here's the Greek over here. So yeah, you can see all these different languages. Of the texts of the Bible in all these different languages. Here's another example, and you can see with the commentary in here and such. All right, beautiful. And all these, again, this is, I'll go back for a second. These are all printing press. This is all, they actually bring this up and they get these letters for the printing press. And the Hebrew and the Greek, all these printers are able to create the letters and such and be able to print these books with the printing presses in these various languages. All right. Any questions about glots or glosses per se? I'm putting more of these in just in case anybody, so you don't have to wait too long. I don't see any hands. I'm going to keep going. Discovery. One discovery that many scholars made in the terms of the medieval Christians was many of the terms that they had come to rely upon, many of the structures were not in the Bible at all. All of a sudden, medieval Christians reading the Bible all of a sudden came to realize that the word Pope is not in the Bible. The word Mass is not in the Bible. The word purgatory is not in the Bible. The word indulgences is not in the Bible. The idea of temporal punishment due to sin is not in the Bible. So when the medieval church told you you need to the Pope told you to go to Mass to get indulgences to stay out of purgatory on account of the temporal punishment due to sin, and you're reading the Bible and you're saying, wait a minute, none of this is in there. None of these terms, none of these concepts are actually in the Bible. This was to shake medieval Christianity profoundly. The Rosary is also not in the Bible. Prayers to the saints is not in the Bible. Now, the church authorities made reply to all these concerns, but the seeds of doubt had been sown. There was, on the other hand, confession to one another, no mention of confessing to priests, no mention of time in purgatory, just heaven and hell. What they did find was a different perspective. Faith lived out with good works, charity towards our neighbor, but not necessary to those who lived sinful lives. This made many medieval Christians question how their faith was being practiced. Now, obviously, the question of how to live out your faith, charity toward good works and such, but they also treating those who will not live it how they're supposed to treat them. So all of a sudden, late medieval Christians reading these Bibles were confronted with an alternative perspective. Many of the structures that medieval Christianity were using were not to be found in the Bible, and instead they were finding other perspectives on how to live out their faith. Thus, with the arrival of the printing press and the availability of glots, which is multiple language, scholars began to read and question. This led some of the more bold scholars to speak out and either demand answers or simply rebel against the existing order of things. John Wycliffe, we've already covered him. He was one of the first one, an English theologian whose radical ideas about church reform, particularly his emphasis on the Bible as the ultimate authority, and his call for vernacular scriptures inspired the Lollard movement. A group of followers who preached his doctrines and challenged Catholic Church practices like transubstantiation and clerical wealth, leading to persecution and becoming a significant precursor to the Protestant Reformation in England. The Lollards were a notable force as the as this in this period. Um, as we're getting closer, John Hus, sometimes spelled Goose or Hus, I guess. Hus means goose in a I don't recall. He's Bohemian. Considered one of the first church reformers, even though some designate to John Wycliffe. His teachings had a strong influence, most immediately in the approval of Reformed Bohemian religious denomination over a century on Martin Luther. So John Hus was a very influential writer. After being ordained a Catholic priest, Hus began to preach in Prague. He opposed many aspects of the Catholic Church in Bohemia, such as his views on ecclesiology, simony, the Eucharist, and other topics. Now, again, you can see simony and ecclesiology and simony have nothing to do with the Eucharist. He is seeing abuses in the church, but he's also leaning into some of the decisions regarding the nature of the Eucharist and how it's used. Alexander V issued a papal bull that excommunicated Hus. However, it was not really enforced, and Hus continued to preach. Hus then spoke out against Alexander V's successor, the anti-pope John the 23rd. Again, we're still at this point, we're still in the Avignon captivity. For a selling of indulgences, Hus's excommunication was then enforced. He spent the next 2 years living in exile. Erasmus of Rotterdam. I'll cover that in a minute, also known as Erasmus, was a Dutch humanist and Christian theologian and pioneering philologist and educationalist. He was, through his writings and translations, one of the most influential scholars in the Northern Renaissance and a major figure in the culture. Erasmus was probably the most educated man in the history of Christendom. He spoke several the European languages fluently, as well as speaking fluently Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. Erasmus was an important figure in Renaissance classical scholarship. He wrote in a spontaneous, copious, and correct but natural Latin. So he spoke and read Latin naturally. As a Catholic priest developing humanist techniques for working on texts, he prepared new Latin and Greek scholarly editions of the New Testament and of the Fathers with annotations and commentary that were immediately vitally influential in both the Protestant Reform and Catholic Reform. So his he was a Catholic priest and spent some time in a monastery and didn't like it. I don't remember the exact reasons, but he came out and was fairly critical of monastic institutions. But he was an amazing polyglot. As I say, I think he spoke every European language fluently. Plus, he had a fluency in all the ancient languages. He at one point actually questioned the quality, and I'll cover him more next century, but he questioned the quality of a Greek manuscript that was presented. So he sat down and from Latin translated his own back into Greek. And that's how strong he was in his various languages. Any questions on that?
Was Hus and Huss the same person?
Yes.
Was he not executed by order of the Pope?
Believe he was executed in Bohemia. I don't know if it was by a pope or not.
But it was by the orders of the papacy, correct?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, it was my understanding there that the king supported him, and there was a trial, and the church threatened to excommunicate the king, which would damn the king if he supported Huss, and then that was the end of Huss's defense.
Oh, interesting. All right. I do believe I think he was actually burned alive. I don't remember. I know that
Okay.
I know he was excommunicated and he was running around hiding and preaching and that kind of stuff. They finally caught him in Bohemia. That's where he came from. I think he was burned alive. I can double check on that.
That I was thinking that also, but I wasn't going to say that.
Yeah, I believe
I was
he
not
was burned
sure.
alive. That tended to be that tended to be the end of those who were too vocal again, in preaching heresy in those days. Even St. Thomas More burned some people alive. So I believe he was burned alive. But yeah, he was on the run for quite a while, was finally caught and tried to be believed he was burned alive. All right, any other questions? I'm going to move along here.
Yeah,
Actually,
oh,
sorry,
sorry. Oh
go
no, the
ahead.
New Testament, Erasmus isn't the King James Bible, is that based off of Erasmus's text?
He was involved. He was he's gone before the King James Bible comes around.
Hmm.
He's a 1500s guy. He actually was very well known of Thomas More, Henry VIII, and he's an older man at that point. So he's a 14, whereas King James Bible is 1611. However, much of the scholarship that goes into the creation of the King James Bible, and much of the commentary and so was taken into account. He had an influence, but he's I almost what been a part of 100, 1611. So now I guess he's what 40 or 50 years too early. He was born late 14 and lived into the 1500s. Again, he was a contemporary of Thomas More, and he was a contemporary of Henry VIII. But the King James Bible is actually after Elizabeth, so it's a little bit later. So no, he's not around for it, but yes, his scholarship was certainly influential.
Okay, I was wondering if he was his text was the one, or if it was the Byzantine text that was influential
No,
in the
that
translation.
that was kind of more of a show off thing. That when they sat down with the king, and I cover that extensively when we get there,
Okay,
1600.
I'll wait till
Um,
then. Okay.
they the text these were pure text. It was what they call the received text or Textus
Yeah, that's the one.
Receptus, of the Greek. It was the one that had come from the Greek, not Erasmus's boutique creation that he himself did. So no, Greek was the original text. Um,
Okay.
Mr. Bryant, I don't want to interrupt this right now, but would you remind me before we quit for the evening, remind me about John Hus and the test, as I have something to tell you about that. Not directly related to John Hus, but it reminds me of something I was talking with the bishop just yesterday, and I wanted to pass this on and I forgot to. So remind me about him and the test before we quit tonight. All right. Any other questions? We'll move on. The Renaissance continues apace. We spoke last time about this idea of the art coming in from the Orient, from the Muslim world, the Indian world, from India, continental India, and from the Far East, Eastern Asia, the Orient. And the West realized it was behind and began challenging itself with perspective, with bodies, with such. And this is going to continue in the 1400s and develop significantly, continues to gain strength. Humanism is born in the 1400s. It's a new school, a new perspective. All right. So perspective was different than that the medieval, where God is at the center and man was homo viator, man on the way, the pilgrim who came from God and was destined to return unto him. Humanism taught that man, since he lived on earth and could not see God, could best understand the world by looking through his own eyes and measuring with his own hands. The school hearkened back to antiquity and saw the Greeks and Romans as practitioners of humanism. From Plato's school at Athens to Caesar's works on government, humanism sought to create an ideal society using reason, logic, and faith in man's own creativity. Now, most humanist scholars were Christians, but felt that God wanted man to use his own skills to find and please God. So this is extremely important. All right, humanism does not seek to do away with God at all. What it says is that man can use his own reason to figure out problems. God certainly can help. God's certainly there, but men can also figure these out. And they went and they looked at the writings of the Greeks and the Romans, and they looked at their wisdom, looked at their philosophy, looked at their strategy, looked at their art, and they said, "Wow, there's some real wisdom." And again, going back to I believe it was Nate's question about what did literacy increase? Literacy exploded. All right, all these people are suddenly picking up these writings of the Greeks and the Romans, also translations of them, and are reading these works and are beginning to say, "Oh, wait, there's a lot of wisdom here. Oh, wait, I can read, what is it, Livy on architecture. I can read Plato on philosophy. I can read Cicero on politics. I can read Julius Caesar on warfare." And all of a sudden, these schools they're beginning to read these classics mostly in Latin, but some of there were translations as well. And all of a sudden, you're having this rebirth of an interest in all these works that hadn't, again, it wasn't they didn't have access to them before, but all of a sudden the books are easy to get. All of a sudden, anybody can walk into a bookstore, so to speak, and pick up a copy of Cicero's, on the Republic, or pick up a copy of a book on architecture. These books are all of a sudden available, they're affordable, and you can read them. So again, most people were learning Latin, but there were translations available. But this was really where the substance of this explosion in literacy took place. Was this growth of the humanist movement and reading the Stoics and the Epicureans and all these ideas of your common man who could hold in his hand the writings of who is the Roman Empire emperor that was the great still Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius's meditations were all of a sudden in the hands of the common man, the common merchant. The merchant's son was reading the meditations of Marcus Aurelius. Stoicism and looking at this wisdom, reading Cicero, reading, again, Julius Caesar. This is really where the printing press and this growth in literacy really explodes in this school of humanism. Humanism is a philosophy, an ethical stance centered on human potential, reason, and compassion, emphasizing people can live meaningful moral lives without supernatural beliefs, focusing on human welfare, dignity, and creating a better life through science, critical thinking, and shared human values. It values individual autonomy, the pursuit of knowledge, and using human capabilities to solve problems and fostering justice and flourishing in this life rather than seeking the rewards in the afterlife. That's a little bit hard hitting as far as it almost sounds like it's atheism. It's not. And again, God was certainly present in the humanist world. However, there's a real rush to appreciate the wisdom of the ancients, the wisdom of the Romans, primarily the Romans, because Latin was easier to read and access. If you were Italian already, reading Latin is not that hard. Greek is a much bigger thing. If you're French and even English, Latin is not nearly as hard as Greek or the other languages, although don't kid yourself, there are plenty of people reading Greek at that point. But this is really where there's just the idea that man was given by God, you might say, this ability to, man can by his own determination create a just world. That justice is an idea. He can read about it. He can read the laws. He can read anything from, the Greeks and their idea of justice and law to Roman justice and law. And he can read this. He think, wait a minute, I can do this. I mean, God is certainly there, but God wants me to read this and use my own natural power, my own natural reason to be able to create something. We don't need to, going to the Bible is great, but why is Hebrew justice any better than Roman or Greek justice? And so it was an incredible discovery of all of these thoughts. And again, the antiques weren't atheists either, but there's not a matter of if you look at a lot, and again, medieval justice, keep in mind, a lot of medieval justice is just the king's decisions. You even have, but I don't really go into this. I could in theory, but it's not something you actually had combat justice where people would have an argument and they would fight, and the one who was left alive was right. I mean, that was kind of barbarian. That was not super common, but it was there. But a lot of justice right now is based around the king and is based around his knowledge, and all of a sudden you have the people reading about, how to run courts, how to do justice. You have Cicero and his how to argue, his rhetoric and logic. And again, you had this with the universities already, and the universities have been studying this for 100 years right now. But you had to go to the university. The books that were printed were there, were handwritten. You were mostly listening to a professor. Now, at this point in time, you can have your you're really even a peasant, but definitely your merchant class, definitely your noble class can walk down the street and buy any of these books and start reading for themselves. And so what it kind of is the same thing with the Bible. It's almost like unguided study. People are reading things and learning things without the benefit of anybody teaching them. And so they're coming to their own conclusions, reading things, and are kind of they are reading things and making this feeling that they can do this as well on their own, is letting that they could deal as much good justice as the king, shall we say. All right, or they read it and they say, wait a minute, I know the Bible as well as the bishop. Why is he bishop again? I know the Bible as well as he does. You're going to see this kind of thing happen. But again, humanism is really going to focus on the idea God is not absent, but all of a sudden the idea that that man gave God reason, man should use reason. God gave man creativity, man should use this. So the idea that these are God-given talents that there, and that man should use these talents to make his life better. Obviously, you have the artistic movement here. Again, you have the going from the very staid and staid images that were prominent in the medieval time, as the famous throwing the robe, and you can see the motion. It was very unusual for the time. You can see this art is being created with perspective, with shape, with form, with musculature. It was very, very big in the Renaissance. The human body, and the way it was designed, the way it moved was a very big thing. Between painting and sculpture was a very big thing in the Renaissance. All right, again, more of the painting here. We're very fond of nudes because they could show the body and how it was done, and even clothing. And you can see how clothing is starting to move. You can see the gestures and all. The things are coming to life. You can even see the sculptures in some way, how perspective and shift, the contrapposta, the moving of the hips, moving of the shoulders, comes in much more. You also have perspective. You can see who's closer and farther away really begins to come in a lot in the Renaissance schools. Any questions about the growth of humanism? I don't hear anything, and off we go. Christian culture in 1400. European culture in 1400 was still deeply Christian, but forces were encroaching which threatened its way of life. Art, music, fashion, and learning, all these were growing and expanding to include new expressions that were at odds with the world of pious order that had become the High Middle Ages. In the next century, we'll see the revolution break forth. You can see here the fashion, you can see the colors, you can see the way it's all decked out. You can see the two different way, the ability to dress, the ability to read, all right, all of these things, the music, the growth of art, collecting arts from the Orient, as well as the explosion of Renaissance art in Europe is really going to shake the Christian civilization that was in place and the church's role in it. All right. Again, you can see more examples here of how you can see the fabric here with the embroidery on it and such here, the way that these things are made. This was very much a Renaissance thing, and you would not really have seen this in the Middle Ages the same way. Also, with the religious, the church is very wealthy, and many orders have elaborate rosaries, elaborate books, elaborate what have yous, and that will become a problem if in the next century. Again, one more time, the other time here you have, again, you can see the brocade fabrics that the nobles would wear. All right. You can see here all the gold and everything. Oftentimes would be actual gold threads. So that's how wealthy and how elaborate the clothing got. You can see even in the armor here. All right. I remember going to France seeing this. They actually would have literally the armor would be etched and gold would be put in elaborate patterns, or it would just be etched out and you would have they actually had articulated where you had bands and you could literally move and walk around. Armor got very, very articulate in the 14, 15, and 1600s. The reaction, the bonfire of the vanities. Upon the bonfire of vanities, the burning of objects condemned by religious authority is an occasion of sin. The phrase usually refers to the bonfire of the vanities of 1497, when supporters of the Dominican friar Girolamo de Savonarola collected and burned thousands of objects such as cosmetics, art, and books in the square of Florence, Italy, on the occasion of Shrove Tuesday, Martedì Grasso. Francesco Giovanni's History of Florence gives a first-hand account of the 1497 Florentine bonfire of the vanities. The focus on this destruction was on objects that might tempt one to sin, including vanity items, mirrors, cosmetics, fine dresses, playing cards, musical instruments. Others targeted books included Savonarola deemed immoral, such as works by Boccaccio, manuscripts or secular songs, artworks, including paintings and sculptures. We covered Boccaccio last time during the Cameron. He gathered them together in the center of town and they burned them. People came forward and brought these occasions of sin, their art, their fashion, their books, their makeup, and everything, and cast it into the fire to be burned in this great thing here. You can see the depictions of this people bringing forward writings and all kinds of various baubles and goods and casting them on this fire and burning this great bonfire of the vanities. He was able to encourage all of Florence to cast away its excess wealth and to burn it all. There's another example here of Savonarola preaching, people bringing forward all of their goods here and burning them all in the town square as a sense of the renunciation of vanity and against this Renaissance growth in art and wealth and vanity ultimately. Savonarola's influence did not go unnoticed by the higher church officials, and his actions came to the attention of Pope Alexander VI. He was excommunicated on the 13th of 1497, charged with heresy and sedition. At the command of Pope Alexander VI, Savonarola was executed by hanging on May 23rd, 1498, and his body was burnt. His death occurred in the Piazza de Signoria, where he had previously held the bonfire of the vanities. Then papal authorities gave word that anyone in possession of the friar's writings had 4 days to turn them over to the papal legate for destruction. Anyone who did not comply also faced excommunication. So, Savonarola, for all his good intentions and all of his creation of the bonfire of the vanities, was tried and executed, and then his writings were burned. So, in the end, the vanities did not go away as everyone was hoping. In fact, but Savonarola did. Any questions about that? All right, off we go. Early English. In the late early 1400s, as language was being formed, the Canterbury Tales was published. This is a great example of early modern English. You could still see influences of Anglo-Saxon, Latin, French, and even some Scandinavian. It's readable, but not easily. You can see here the Knight's Tale, and there's several chapters here. This is actually is in Latin here. It says, "Now this is drawing nigh, native land and laurel case, whom the old story is telling us," and that makes more sense. As the Duke that died Theseus, the Duke who was called Theseus, of Athens, he was lord and governor. That's not too hard. And his time switch a conqueror. So you can see some of the words are the same, but it is definitely very different than modern English. But the Canterbury Tales tells the story of these people on the lawn, and he tells these stories in English. And this is one of the first examples. And again, this was printed. This is why it became so popular. Was the printing press made this accessible? The Canterbury Tales, the individual, and there's several chapters here. Um, Knight's Tale, Miller's Tale, Reeves, Cook's, the Man of Law, Wife of Bath, the Friar, the Summoner, I think that has to do with the law, the clerk, the merchant, the squire, the franklin, the physician, the pardoner. I think he actually sells pardons. The Shipman's Tale, Shipman's Prioress, Prioress's Tale, the Tale of Sir Topas, the Tale of Melby, the Monk's Tale, the Tale of the Nun's Priest. You can see all the different people in the social hierarchy. There are several tales, but mainly they're on their way to Canterbury, and each tells them is of a tale. They're not all virtuous. Not all of them are going for a good reason. This was one of the most important works in English until Shakespeare. So as you go along, and I'll go back up here again, the where is it here? It was the pardoner's tale. As he rides along, is trying to sell pardons to those on their way to Canterbury, so they don't have to go; they can just buy a pardon. I don't recall all of them here. It was a long time ago I read it, but and it's not really that important, but it's a fascinating work. And something really, if you ever have time and you want to read through and get a real sense of English society and early English, there's some good translations. A beautiful work and very fascinating. But these are all people going along and they're interacting, telling their tales and talking, and all done in early English. It's very descriptive, wonderful puns, wonderful making fun of them and things like that. And all of this is done in very early English. So this was the big shows the development of English. Again, until Shakespeare is one of the most important works. Any questions about that? All right, off we go. All right, here we are, the Wrexham, and that brings us to the end of our 1400s. All right, that looks like it was right at 1 hour. The next one I have is going to take over an hour, I'll guarantee you. So do I have any questions regarding, actually, let me ask the question of, so I was talking with the bishop yesterday, about the question of the canonical exam. And I asked him and I said, do you want the diaconal to be not as hard as the priest? He says, yes. He wants it to be an overview, key figures, key movements. So I'm working on it right now, but someone like John Hus will not be on the exam. He just isn't important enough. Um, Priestly exam, you might have to know a little bit about him, but the diaconal exam will be major trends, major people, major movements that you'll need to know about. So it will, much of what I'm covering here will, the smaller things we will not need to know. All right, it'll be major trends, major figures, major movements, major councils, and all you'll need to know about. So we're not going to hit you with any kind of anything obscure that you're supposed to know. As long as you understand the trends throughout history and who made the move, you'll do fine. Do I any questions about the 1400s?
I have a question. It's really a definition, because in this period of history in the West, what was the definition of a heresy? Merely anything that went against the Pope, or
Some of the popes would certainly think so. Um, Usually it was. So that's actually a really good question and not really, it doesn't really belong into the subject of church history, but I'm going to answer it for you because it's a fascinating question. Um, Heresy, technically the word heresy means picking and choosing. Smorgasbord, smorgas is almost like heresy. You can walk along and you pick what you want, leave what you don't. So technically heresy means picking and choosing. Um, Formally, a heresy is to pick and choose what you want to believe in of the deposit of faith. I want to believe that Jesus is God, but I don't want to believe that he's fully human. Or I believe that Jesus is the Son of God, and great. I don't want to believe he's actually divine. Or I want to believe that that Jesus isn't, that baptism does this, but the Eucharist doesn't do that. It has to do usually with the deposit of faith, those things which had been established, and to and to deny them. Now, when it comes to heresy, and this is far more information than you probably wanted to, but since you brought it up, um, to accuse someone of heresy is a three-step process. The first is that they have to know what the teaching is. Second thing is that they have to specifically refuse that teaching, and third of all, they have to do so willfully and intentionally. So they have to understand what is right. They have to be confronted and they have to deny it publicly, and then they can be accused of heresy. So the fact that they did this a lot with Pope Francis with his, oh, who am I to judge about
Mm.
homosexuality? Like, oh my God, that's heresy. No, it's an offhanded comment. He had to be sat down and say, okay, Holy Father, do you understand the church's teaching on homosexuality? Yes, you do, but I will not follow it. So technically, being found guilty of heresy is a somewhat complicated process and requires an articulation of the truth and a refusal to accept it by the person being accused. Um, what's going to happen in with the Reformation is a number of these again, transubstantiation. Rome had decided on it. If you denied transubstantiation, they accused you of heresy. That's technically not heresy. However, Rome has decided this, and so when you say against the Pope, you're not really wrong. But the idea of heresy is actually kind of expanded in some ways during the period of the Reformation, where if you denied, again, transubstantiation, if you denied the power of the papacy, if you denied, some of these other things, the existence of purgatory, perhaps, and you said, wait a minute, purgatory is not in the Bible. How can it be heresy to deny something that is in the Bible? The church has decided. And you say, wait a minute, how can the church decide this? And that is going to be one of the crux points of the Reformation, was this dogmatizing of extra biblical teachings. So technically, heresy requires them to know the truth and deny the truth. What's going to happen is that you're going to have a number of these extra biblical practice teachings that have snuck in, anything from purgatory to transubstantiation to papal authority. Um, and they're going to say, if you don't believe this, you're a heretic. And they're going to say, wait a minute, this is not in the Bible. So technically, heresy is supposed to be an established doctrine, dogma, really, an established dogma. Jesus is both God and man. Trinity is Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, right? Or even like, the church has bishops, priests, and deacons, and the baptism is a regenerative sacrament that actually gives grace. These are things that are established truths that have been from the beginning. And if you deny these, then you're all of a sudden not, the Mormons are not Christians because they deny key and essential parts of the church, kind of thing. However, during the Reformation, you're right, Rome had established a number of these things, purgatory, transubstantiation, on and on, that were not in the Bible, and they were
Mhm.
making them dogma. And these reformers said, "Wait a minute, you can't do that."
So it had been my teaching, or from a different source, from an Eastern source, that a heresy was a falsehood that affected one's trip to salvation. So, and others, if it was a matter of an opinion, but it would have no effect on salvation depending on how you believed it, that was not considered a heresy. But
Right.
it seems like the West has a much broader net with what it would consider a heresy.
Yes, very much so.
Okay.
Um, the East leaves a number of things as mysteries. The nature of the Eucharist is they call metusia, which is the change of substance. How does it happen? East has no definition. West, transubstantiation, accidents and substance. Aristotle has thus stated. So yes, the West is going to define things as doctrines, even almost as dogmas, and call you a heretic for not conforming. The East will not do that.
Okay. Thank you.
Certainly, very good. Any other questions about for this evening? All right, gentlemen, it is now 7:10. I'm going to give you a little bit of grace here on Ember Friday, and we're gonna quit early. Um, we will continue next Friday, and I'm gonna pretty much have a full 2 hours. I have a law between the Renaissance and the Reformation. I have quite a bit to go through. But this evening, if I start off hot now, I'll never get through it. So I'm going to give you a little bit of grace. You can spend your Ember Friday evening with a little bit of extra time on your hands. And I will see all of you next Friday. All right. God bless, gentlemen. And you guys have a wonderful week, and I will see you next Friday.